So we're going to be simplifying trig identities. Alright, so you've seen this over here on the right here, this basic trig identities before. It's in the book. Alright, we're going to be using that to try to simplify this expression. This tangent times pi over 2 minus theta times sine of theta. We need to simplify this thing and get it as tiny as possible. Right? We want to simplify it down. So the first thing I look at is I see tangent of theta, tangent pi over 2 minus theta, and then over here in our trig functions I see tangent pi over 2 minus theta. Alright, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to rewrite it. It says it's all equal to cotangent. So I'm going to rewrite that as cotangent of theta, and I still have times the sine of theta. Now, cotangent. Right? So cotangent can now be written as over here cosine of, right, there it is, cosine of theta. Okay, so cotangent of theta is cosine of theta divided by sine of theta. And then again I still have times the sine of theta. Cross cancel. I'm left with cosine of theta. Okay? So that's all. When we're trying to simplify, we're trying to get it to be as small as possible. That's the big thing with these problems. We try to get them to be as small as possible. So you will need this chart in front of you for most of these problems. Alright. Part B. We have cosecant of theta times cotangent squared of theta plus 1 over sine of theta. And most times you're really not going to know where to start, but you just try doing something, right? Just try something. So like I see the 1 over sine of theta, and I'm trying to simplify, right? So when I try to simplify it, I'm trying to make it as small as possible. So sine 1 over sine of theta is cosecant of theta. So let me rewrite it. So I have cosecant of theta times the cotangent squared of theta plus, and here's the one we rewrote, this is going to be cosecant of theta. Alright, now I start looking at this thing and I'm still not sure what to do, but I do notice that we have a cosecant theta and a cosecant theta there. And I'm saying, well, let's see what happens if I factor out a cosecant theta. It might help me. It might just lead me down a dead end. Okay, but I have to try something. So since I factored out the cosecant, I already took that, so I'm left with cotangent squared of theta plus 1. Alright? So now I start looking back over here at our trig identities, and I'm trying to see, is there anything that will help me out? And I see cotangent squared of theta is equal to, cotangent squared of theta plus 1 is equal to cosecant squared. So I have cosecant squared of theta times, all of this is cosecant squared of theta. Well, cosecant times cosecant squared. When you're multiplying and the bases are the same, because the bases are just cosecant, we simply add the exponents. So 1 plus 2, so I have cosecant to the third of theta. Alright? And like I said, sometimes you're going to start doing a problem and you're just going to get led down a dead end. But you have to try something. You have to try something. Alright, part C. Tangent squared theta times cosecant squared of theta minus 1 all over secant squared of theta. Now again, I had really no idea where to start with this problem, and I just said, let me start somewhere. So I just decided, let me start with tangent. Alright, I didn't know what to do. I said, let me just start with something. So tangent is sine squared of theta over cosine squared of theta. And then I looked at, well, here's cosecant squared of theta. Right, and cosecant is 1 over sine. And that got me thinking, so maybe something can happen here. So cosecant squared is just going to be 1 over sine squared of theta minus 1 divided by secant squared of theta. And I get lucky here. Those cross cancel. So now I'm left with 1 over cosine squared of theta minus 1 divided by. Now, at secant squared, again, I had no idea what to do with it, but I'm trying to cancel something. I'm trying to get something, get something going here. Alright? So secant squared of theta. I just think about it. I said, well, secant squared, well, secant is just 1 over cosine. And I already have a cosine in my numerator. So I said, well, let me give it a try. Let me give that a try here. So I have, alright, so I'm looking at that. And I said, okay, well, I have 1 over cosine squared of theta. And I said, well, let me see where that's going to lead us. A little bit of algebra. A little bit of algebra. I'm sorry. A little bit of algebra. We start thinking about it. I have 1 over cosine squared of theta minus 1. That whole thing is divided by 1 over cosine squared of theta. And we know that we can't divide. We cannot divide by a fraction. So I have 1 over cosine squared of theta minus 1. All of that times cosine squared of theta. Apparently I forgot the s there. Alright, now distribute. We distribute just like you've done any other time, except for now we're distributing with trig functions. Do we agree that we're going to end up with cosine squared of theta over cosine squared of theta, which gives me 1, minus cosine squared of theta. Alright, all of this is still just straight algebra, but algebra with some trig functions. Now, I look back over at my trig identities, and I'm looking for something with 1 and cosine squared, because I'm still trying to shrink this down. 1 and cosine squared. 1 and cosine squared. I have that. Well, I have to manipulate that. Okay? So, if we do a little bit of mental math, I have sine squared of theta is equal to, I subtract cosine squared from both sides, 1 minus cosine squared of theta. So then all of this is just equal to sine squared of theta. And we're done. So we've taken this really ugly problem, right? Really ugly problem up there, and forgive all the highlighting, down to a simple sine squared of theta.